Hello, welcome to another Stitches and Scribbles video. My name is Erin, and today we're going to be continuing our Dungeons & Dragons knitting series. I figured that since we are slowly approaching colder weather, at least in the northern hemisphere, it was time to pick that series up again, and I'm really excited for some new projects. Hopefully we'll get one each month, assuming I can stay on schedule, so that we'll be finishing around November with our final piece of the 9-piece pattern collection. For this project, which is the Half Elf Blanket Shawl, I am using Yarn Bee Soft and Sleek DK in the color Pretty in Peacock. This is a pretty thin weight yarn. Looking on the label to see what it's classified as, but I would call it probably a lightweight 2. I don't think it says on the label. So grab the lightweight yarn of your choice. I do have 5 of these. I'll let you know at the end of the project how many I ended up using. Each one is 478 yards. So I'm thinking I'll use at least 3, possibly 4 or 5, depending on how big I end up wanting the blanket shawl to be. You're also going to need knitting needles. I am using 3.75 millimeter knitting needles, which is a US size 5. You can use circular or straight needles for this one, but if you do choose to use straight needles like I am using, I suggest that you get ones that are really, really long. And as always, you will need scissors, and you may need stitch markers if you are like me and tend to go on autopilot when you're knitting, so that you can mark off the borders. We're going to start with the cast on method of your choice. You're going to need to cast on 120 stitches for this project, which seems like a lot. If you are using straight needles, that may mean that your project is bunched up when it's on the needles, but it should still fit without pulling itself off. In case you haven't seen my basic cast on method before, I don't know what this is called. I haven't seen anybody else do a cast on quite like this. This is just the one that I was taught. So I grab the yarn in one hand, loop it around my thumb, and then pick up the stitch from the one sitting on top of my thumb. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5. And again, you're casting on 120 stitches. Once you have your 20 stitches cast on, we're going to start with 8 rows of garter stitch. So 8 rows where you just knit all the way across. Show you the first couple stitches. Sometimes the first row can be a little tricky with yarn that splits. Whoops, lost that stitch. Try that again. Again, just plain garter stitch all the way across for those first 8 rows. And then we'll move on to the repeat for the rest of the pattern. Once you have your 8 rows of garter stitch, it should look something like this, and now we're going to start the repeating pattern. So for row 9, we're going to start by knitting 8. This is going to be our garter stitch border. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And if you are a stitch marker person, this is where you would slide in your first stitch marker, so that you know the difference between your border stitches and the stitches in the middle. Now we're going to start with a knit 1, purl 1 repeat, starting with a knit 1 and then a purl 1. You're going to continue this until the last 8 stitches, alternating knit 1 and purl 1 again until the final 8 stitches. Once you are back to your final 8 stitches, just double checking, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you're going to slide on your other stitch marker if you are using stitch markers, and just knit the remaining 8 stitches across. Like that. And then rows 10 and 11 are going to be repeats of row 9. So you're going to knit 8, then do knit 1, purl 1 until the last 8, and knit the final 8, which if you have those stitch markers should be really easy to see. I'll show you what it looks like after row 11 and then show you what to do for rows 12 through 14. Okay, once you've made it to row 11, you should start to see those ribbing sections form in the middle. Instead of just continuing the ribbing, we're actually going to adjust how we do our knit and purl stitches so that the sections of ribbing alternate. So you should have 3 rows where the ribbing matches up, and then it should switch over. So we're going to start row 12 the same way as before with knitting 8 up till that stitch marker. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Move the marker over. Now instead of starting with a knit, we're going to start with a purl. So adjusting how we started from before. So purl 1 and then knit 1. You're going to continue purl 1, knit 1 until your second stitch marker, and then do your garter stitch edging again, just like normal. Alright, and rows 13 and 14 are going to be identical to row 12. So if you look closely, you can see there's our previous set of 3 for ribbing, and it has now shifted over 1, so we should get some alternating ribbing sections. So again, you're repeating row 12, which is knit 8, purl 1, knit 1 until last 8, and then knit 8 for rows 13 and 14. Here's what it looks like up through row 14, so you can see those alternating ribs are starting to form. I have seen this called raindrop stitch, but I know it has other names as well. You're going to continue rows 9 through 14 until you reach your desired length. The goal of this shawl is that it can go over your shoulders and wrap around the front, but also be scrunched and worn as a scarf, so length is up to you. I'll show you a couple of progress clips along the way, and then of course the final product. Once you have reached the desired length for your piece, we're going to finish it off with 8 rows of plain garter stitch, just like what we started with, and then you can bind off with the cast off method of your choice. Okay, and here is the finished piece. I'm showing it just laid out so that I can show you all the different options without having to change in between. But if you just wear it over your shoulders, it just looks like this. Covers the shoulders, hits about the middle of your waist, at least on me, and I'm pretty tall. I used about 2 skeins of yarn on this. I think originally I was intending to use more. So if you used more, it would definitely be longer. And because the yarn is on the thin side, you can also scrunch it up to make a scarf. This is, if you're planning on wearing it like this, I'd really recommend adding fringe. I just cut some of my leftover yarn to make the fringe and tied it in a knot as a scarf. And then if you are feeling more on the adventurous or fantasy inspired side, you can always drape it over one shoulder and pin it. I used a kilt pin for this one, and it'll create a kind of fringed poncho effect. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you are interested in following me elsewhere, check all of the information in the description. And thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!